Have you ever found yourself wondering how an ancient spiritual community, one so far removed from our modern world, actually wrote its rules? I mean, more than just the core philosophy, right? How do they handle the day-to-day friction, the social stuff, even how the public saw them?
It's fascinating, isn't it? It gives you this incredible insight into how ideals meet, well, reality. These communities, like the early Buddhist Sangha we're talking about, they weren't just concepts on paper. They were living, breathing groups of people navigating some very real, very human challenges.
Actually. And today, we're doing just that, taking a real deep dive into a specific set of these early Buddhist monastic laws. They're called the Pācittiya rules.
Right.
And we're going to zoom in on the really intricate regulations about how monks, the bhikkhus and nuns, the Bhikkhunīs, interacted.
But we're not just listing rules. That wouldn't be much of a deep dive.
No way. We're actually digging into the fascinating stories, the real-world incidents that led to these rules being created. We're pulling insights straight from the ancient Pali texts themselves.
Yeah, our mission here is really to give you a kind of shortcut, a way to understand the sometimes surprising practical wisdom and the rich social background behind these guidelines, which can look pretty complex at first glance.
Get ready for maybe some aha moments about the daily lives of these early monastics. You might find them more relatable than you think.
Definitely.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this first one, Pācittiya XCI. This rule really seems to set the stage for how things like authority, decorum, and even just the art of teaching were structured.
It's a great starting point because it shows right away this meticulous attention they paid to leadership. It wasn't just about knowing stuff. It was about ensuring that those who guide are, well, truly exemplary.
It apparently kicked off with a simple, almost mundane problem. Senior monks who properly instructed nuns, they naturally received respect, support things like robes, alms, food. Pretty standard.
Right.
But then, this group of monks, they pop up a lot in these stories. The Trivagas, they kind of wanted the same benefits. So they offered to instruct the nuns too.
Okay.
But the problem was, their instruction was, well, minimal, to put it mildly. The texts literally say very little Dhamma talk, followed by basically a whole day of just idle chatter. And then they just send the nuns off.
Not exactly quality spiritual guidance.
Not at all. And the nuns, quite rightly, were unhappy. They actually complained directly to the Buddha.
Makes sense.
So the Buddha, seeing this misuse of, position, he rebuked the Trivagyas, and then he laid down an initial rule. A monk must be formally appointed by the Sangha, the whole monastic community, to instruct nuns.
Okay, that seems like a solid first step, formal appointment.
It does. But these Trivagyas, they were, let's say, persistent.
Sounds like it.
They tried to find a loophole. They attempted to appoint themselves, but outside the recognized Sangha boundary, sort of off the books.
Oh, interesting. Trying to game the system.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really revealing. The Buddha didn't just tighten the appointment process. He went deeper. He specified that any monk appointed to instruct nuns had to possess 8 crucial qualities.
8. Okay, that's serious. And it wasn't just about stopping bad behavior then. It was proactive.
Precisely. It was about defining what excellence in spiritual leadership actually looked like.
So these qualities, without listing all 8, what's the gist? What were they looking for?
But think about it. They weren't just looking for someone who could talk a good game. They needed someone deeply virtuous, someone genuinely knowledgeable in the teachings, able to remember and explain really profound concepts, like those described as beautiful in the beginning, middle, and end.
So real substance, not just rhetoric.
Exactly. And get this, one quality was having an unblemished record specifically regarding nuns, meaning they hadn't previously caused a nun to fall into a serious offense.
Wow, that's very specific. Shows a real concern for ethical conduct and maybe reputation within the community.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the rule didn't stop at qualifications. It even outlined the formal procedure for instruction.
Okay, how did that work?
The appointed monk had to prepare the space sweep, provide water, set out seats. The nuns would greet him respectfully. Then, crucially, he had to ask if they were in harmony, united.
Yeah, and if they were.
If yes, he delivers the instruction. Simple enough.
But if they weren't in harmony, what then?
Then he couldn't just launch into the teaching. First, he had to remind them of the 8 Garudamas. These are the grave rules, foundational rules for the nuns' order, specifically to help restore that unity.
Right, the Garudamas. These are pretty significant. They lay out a clear structure, don't they?
They really do. They highlight this structured hierarchy, and also the interdependence between the monks and nuns orders. Like the rule that a nun, even if she'd been ordained for 100 years, still had to show formal homage to a monk, even one just newly ordained.
That's quite a statement about seniority and the relationship between the orders.
And there's more, like the requirement for nuns to consult the monk sangha every half-month to get the date for the uposatha, the main observance day, and also for the instruction itself.
So regular, structured interaction was built in?
Yes, and if a nun broke one of these grave rules, she had to undergo a special half-month penance called manada in both sanghas, monks, and nuns.
Both. Okay, reinforces that connection.
Also things like needing ordination approval from both sanghas after a 2-year training period for novices, and a really strict rule. A nun must never revile or abuse a monk in any way.
So the big picture takeaway from this first rule, Pācittiya ex CLA.
I think it just vividly shows this incredibly structured approach to leadership. It's not just about who's qualified on paper, but about the detailed, almost ritual-like process designed to maintain spiritual discipline, community harmony, and trust.
Yeah, it's like a blueprint for ensuring accountability and integrity. You could almost see parallels in how organizations today try to establish good governance, right?
Absolutely. Okay, so from that framework of proper instruction, let's move to Pācittiya ex defend. This one's fascinating because it pits, like, spiritual ability against practical reputation. It's all about the illumination and timing of instruction.
Ah, yes, the case of Venerable Vagga. He was properly appointed as a nun instructor, but his teaching style was unusual.
How so?
Well, he apparently gave a surprisingly repetitive and brief instruction, just kept reiterating one single verse. The nuns initially were pretty underwhelmed. They felt his teaching wasn't very rich or, effective.
Okay, not a great start.
But then, hearing their doubts, Vagga did something extraordinary. He performed a series of supernatural feats. The texts say he flew, stood, sat, even slept in the air, emitted smoke and flames. It sounds incredible.
Oh, seriously?
That's what the texts report. And all while doing this, he was still reciting that slim verse, along with other words the Buddha.
So what did the nuns think then?
They were completely blown away, astonished. They exclaimed they'd never received such an amazing and wonderful instruction. So the superpowers definitely worked.
Okay, so problem solved.
Not quite. Here's the catch. Vagga got caught up in his amazing display and continued instructing until it was very dark, late into the night.
Uh-oh. I sense a practical issue coming.
Exactly. The public consequence. The city gates were locked by the time they finished. The nuns had to spend the night outside the city walls.
Oh, dear.
And the next morning, when they finally entered the city, the public saw them and were highly critical. They accused them of being immoral, basically suggesting they'd spent the night with the monks.
The perception problem again, even though it wasn't true.
Precisely. And this led directly to the Buddha laying down the rule. If a monk, even if appointed, instructs nuns after sunset, it is a Pācittiya offense.
That really highlights something crucial, doesn't it?
It really does. The key takeaway here is crystal clear. Even extraordinary spiritual abilities, genuine psychic powers, did not override the importance of basic decorum and maintaining the Sangha's reputation in the eyes of the lay community.
That phrase you mentioned earlier, manusa ujjayanti.
Yes, the people criticize. It shows up repeatedly. Public perception was a huge factor in shaping these rules. You couldn't just ignore how things looked.
Which brings us neatly to another interesting case, Pācittiya XD3. This one looks at the location of instruction, and it really shows how discipline and compassion could sometimes, pull in different directions.
And guess who's back? Our friends, the Chabagyas.
Of course. What did they do this time?
Well, they decided to go to the nuns' residence to instruct them. This was a break from custom. Usually the nuns came to the monks.
And the nuns?
They found it inappropriate. They felt they should be the ones seeking out instruction, not the other way around. So they complained again.
Leading to the Buddha's initial rule, which was pretty strict, right?
Yep.
Any monk who goes to a nun's residence to instruct nuns commits a Pācittiya offense. Seems straightforward. Clear boundary. Keep the spaces separate for formal instruction.
But then, the real world intervened again.
It did, in a really poignant way.
Mm-hmm.
Mahapajapati Gautami, who was not only a highly revered senior nun, but also the Buddha's own foster mother, she fell seriously ill.
Oh, wow.
And because of this new strict rule, the senior monks hesitated to go to her residence to give her instruction, even though she was sick.
So she couldn't get the teachings.
Exactly. And Mahapajapati Gautami actually complained to the Buddha. She said she was missing the Dhamma talks that had always brought her comfort and ease, especially now that she was ill.
That's heartbreaking. How did the Buddha respond?
This is where you really see the compassion. He immediately refined the rule. The new version was, any monk who goes to a nun's residence to instruct nuns, except at the proper time, commits a Pācittiya offense.
Except at the proper time. And what defined the proper time? It was specifically defined as when a nun is ill and genuinely unable to travel to receive instruction or attend an assembly herself.
That's a really beautiful illustration, isn't it? How the rules could evolve.
It truly is. It shows the system wasn't rigid. It balanced the need for rules to prevent impropriety with this profound compassion for the real needs, the suffering, and the well-being of his followers. It was a living code, adapting to life.
Which leads us nicely into the next one. Pācittiya ex fifth. This seems to be about protecting the teachers themselves, specifically guarding the reputation of instructors against baseless accusations.
And you can probably guess who's making the accusations.
Let me guess. The Chavaggyas.
Bingo. So when those senior monks who were diligently instructing nuns received the usual material support robes, alms, lodging, medicine, the Chavaggyas started publicly criticizing them.
What were they saying?
They were essentially claiming these dedicated monks were only instructing for gain, implying their motives weren't pure, that they weren't truly spiritual, just after the material benefits.
Undermining their credibility.
No.
Nasty stuff.
Very much so. And the Buddha's response was swift and clear. Any monk who says, senior monks instruct nuns for gain commits a Pācittiya offense.
And gain wasn't just about stuff, was it?
No, the definition was broad. It included material things, yes, but also immaterial aspects like honor, reverence, respect, worship, basically any form of support or esteem.
So the insight here is really about protecting the integrity of this system.
Exactly. This rule shielded those serving the Sangha. It aimed to prevent baseless slander that could sow discord, undermine faith among the lay followers, and ultimately discourage monks from taking on important roles like instructing nuns. It's about maintaining trust and respect within the order itself.
Okay, so we've seen how these rules shaped authority, instruction, reputation. Now let's shift gears a bit and look at rules governing broader, everyday interactions. Things like travel, personal conduct, material exchanges. Starting with Pācittiya XXV, giving robes to unrelated nuns.
Right. This one starts with a simple scenario. A monk's own robe was worn out. He received his share of some distributed robes, but he gave it to a nun who was also in need.
Seems like a kind gesture. What was the issue?
They had often seen each other while on their alms rounds, so they were familiar, but, and this is the key point, they were unrelated, not family.
And other monks saw this and raised eyebrows?
Exactly. They questioned whether this kind of direct giving between unrelated monastics of opposite sexes was appropriate.
So the Buddha's initial rule?
Straightforward. Any monk who gives a robe to an unrelated nun commits a Pācittiya offense. Keep things clear, avoid potential attachments or perceptions of favoritism.
But, like before, did this strict rule cause unforeseen problems?
It did. Monks became overly cautious. They started hesitating even to give exchange robes. The Pali term is parivattakasavara to nuns, even when it was a legitimate exchange and the nuns needed them. This caused real hardship.
So another refinement was needed.
Yes. The Buddha adjusted the rule. Any monk who gives a robe to an unrelated nun, except for exchange, commits a Pācittiya offense.
Okay, except for exchange. And how was unrelated defined here?
It's quite specific. Individuals not connected through mother or father going back 7 generations of grandfathers, so quite distant.
Wow, they were thorough. And the exchange exception covered.
It meant a monk was allowed to give an exchange robe, essentially swapping one robe for another, perhaps of different size or quality to any other monastic. Another monk, a nun, a female trainee, sikamana, a male novice, samanera, or a female novice, samaneri.
So this rule really shows that balancing act again, doesn't it?
Perfectly. Balancing the need to prevent any hint of impropriety in personal dealings with the practical necessity of ensuring the welfare and support of everyone in the broader monastic community. Very pragmatic.
Following on from robes, let's look at Pācittiya 6.6, which deals with sewing robes for unrelated nuns. This seems to push further into ensuring simplicity and avoiding scandal.
It does, and this one involves a specific monk, Venerable Udai. The story goes that he sewed a robe for an unrelated nun.
Okay, so similar territory to the last rule.
But he took it a step further. He didn't just sew a plain robe, he added an elaborate, clever design. The Pali is Paibanansatta right in the middle of it.
A fancy robe for a nun.
Apparently so. And then he told her to wear it prominently when the nuns gathered for instruction. Sort of show it off.
Oh dear. I can see where this is going.
Exactly. It definitely got noticed. It sparked both public and monastic outcry. Lay people saw this unusually decorated robe and started criticizing the nuns, calling them immoral, rogues, shameless. Basically, acting like laywomen, not renunciants.
And the nuns themselves.
They were embarrassed and questioned Dudai's actions. This clearly wasn't promoting the right image.
So the Buddha's rule became,
any monk who sews or causes to be sewn a robe for an unrelated nun commits a Pācittiya offense. Again, unrelated has that same family lineage definition.
the takeaway seems pretty clear here.
Absolutely. It really underscores the importance they placed on maintaining simplicity and modesty in monastic attire. It wasn't just personal preference. It was about preventing actions that could lead to public scandal or undermine the whole spirit of renunciation. Preserving the image and discipline of the Sangha was paramount.
Okay, let's move on to travel. Pācittiya XD7 deals with traveling on the same road with nuns. This sounds like another area where practicalities and perception might clash.
And you'd be right. And guess who was involved in the initial incident?
Please don't tell me it was the Chabagiyas again.
Afraid so. These monks agreed to travel on the same road as a group of nuns.
And the public reaction.
Predictably negative. Lay people saw them traveling together and drew unfavorable comparisons. They likened them to householders traveling with their wives, implying an inappropriate level of intimacy or familiarity.
So the Buddha stepped in with an initial rule.
Yes. Any monk who agrees to travel on the same road with a nun, even as far as the next village, commits a Pācittiya offense. A clear measure to manage that public perception. Keep a visible distance.
But, and there's often a but, real-world danger.
Precisely. A situation arose where a group of monks and nuns were traveling separately to the same destination. The monks, following the new rule strictly, refused to travel alongside the nuns, even though the route might have been unsafe. Tragically, the nuns, traveling behind and unprotected, were attacked and abused by robbers.
Oh, that's terrible. So the rule, meant to protect reputation, inadvertently created danger.
Exactly. This starkly highlighted the unforeseen negative consequences, so the Buddha had to adapt again.
Leading to the refined rule.
Any monk who agrees to travel on the same road with a nun, even as far as the next village, except at the proper time, commits a Pācittiya offense.
And the proper time exception was defined how?
It was specifically when the road was known to be dangerous. If it required traveling in a caravan for safety, if there were clear signs of robbers, or a generally acknowledged threat in that area, then traveling together for safety was permitted.
This is such a powerful example, isn't it? Rules being adapted not just for appearances or morality, but for sheer physical safety.
It really is. It shows that profound pragmatism again. The Buddha prioritized the actual well-being and safety of the monastics while still trying to maintain appropriate boundaries and manage perception where it was safe to do so.
And Pācittiya XE8 seems to follow almost exactly the same logic, but applies it to travel by boat.
It does. And no prizes for guessing who kicked this one off.
The Chabagiyas boarding a boat with nuns.
You got it. They agreed to board the same boat, and the public reaction was very similar to the road travel people saw it, made comparisons to householders playing in a boat with their wives, implying it was recreational, maybe intimate, not appropriate for monastics.
So initial rule, no sharing boats.
Pretty much. Any monk who agrees to board the same boat with a nun, whether going upstream or downstream, commits a Pācittiya offense. Again, maintain separation, avoid misinterpretation.
And again, a dangerous scenario forced to rethink.
Exactly the same pattern. Monks and nuns needed to cross a river. The monks, sticking to the rule, hesitated to share a boat. The nuns went across separately.
And were attacked by robbers again.
Sadly, yes. Attacked and abused. It demonstrated the danger of the strict separation in certain contexts.
Leading to the refined rule.
Any monk who agrees to board the same boat with a nun, whether going upstream or downstream, except for crossing, commits a Pācittiya offense.
And crossing means just that. Like, directly across.
Yes, specifically allowed for a direct transverse crossing of a river or body of water, not for, say, a long journey up or down the river together.
It just powerfully reinforces that pattern, doesn't it? Safety concerns leading to a necessary relaxation of general rules about separation. It shows how responsive the code could be.
Very much so. Practicality and safety often led to these crucial exceptions.
Okay, next up, Pācittiya X Unav X. This one deals with eating food prepared by nuns, knowingly. Sounds like it gets into tricky territory around support and influence.
It does, and the setup involves quite a dramatic incident with a nun named Thulananda.
What happened with her?
She had a regular alms connection with a particular household. But one day, the householder invited some respected senior monks over. Thulananda apparently interfered. She actually insulted the invited monks and started praising some other more controversial monks group.
Really? That seems inappropriate.
Extremely. It backfired badly. The householder was so annoyed, he basically expelled her and cut off her alms support entirely.
Wow. Okay, so how does this connect to monks eating food prepared by nuns?
Well, related to this kind of dynamic, the monk Devadatta, who often features in problematic stories, was found knowingly eating alms food that had been prepared by a nun.
But what did prepared by a nun actually mean here? Did she cook it?
That's the crucial point. No, not necessarily cooking. In this context, it specifically meant a nun encouraging lay people who were otherwise unwilling or hadn't planned to give food to a particular monk, like nudging them, oh, you should give alms to this venerable, he's very learned, influencing their decision.
Ah, okay. So it's about undue influence on lay support.
Exactly. So the Buddha's initial rule was, any monk who knowingly eats alms food prepared in this sense by a nun commits a Pācittiya offense, trying to keep the lines of support clear and independent.
But did this cause problems too?
Yes, another case of unintended consequences. A monk was visiting his own relatives. His family offered him food, but because a nun who was present simply suggested they give him the food, the monk refused to eat it.
Why?
He believed, based on the rule, that because the nun had prompted it, the food was now prepared by a nun and therefore forbidden for him. He actually went hungry visiting his own family.
Oh dear. So another refinement was needed for practicality's sake.
Indeed. The Buddha clarified the rule. Any monk who knowingly eats alms food prepared by a nun, except if prepared by householders beforehand, commits a Pācittiya offense.
What does prepared by householders beforehand mean?
It basically clarified that if the food was already being prepared by the family as part of their normal routine, or if they had already decided to offer it, like for invited guests, or it was just their regular meal being shared, then it was permissible, even if a nun happened to be there or made a comment. The nun's interjection didn't taint food that was already intended for offering.
So this rule is really about ensuring monks' financial independence, in a way, and preventing nuns from, directing lay support.
That seems to be the core aim, reinforcing distinct roles and ethical boundaries around who influences almsgiving and avoiding dependencies or manipulations, however well-intentioned.
Okay, finally, let's look at Pācittiya XXX. This feels like a really important one. Sitting alone with a nun in seclusion. Clear boundaries seem essential here.
Absolutely, and this one stems from a particularly sensitive situation involving Venerable Udayi again.
What was the situation?
His former wife had become a nun. They apparently visited each other frequently, which might have already raised some eyebrows. But then Udayi was specifically observed sitting alone with her in what the texts call a secluded place.
Just the two of them.
Just the two of them. And other monks saw this and, understandably, worried. They were concerned about the appearance of impropriety and maybe the potential for actual misconduct given their past relationship.
So the Buddha laid down a rule.
Yes. Any monk who sits alone with a nun in a secluded place commits a Pācittiya offense. Seems clear enough.
But how did they define alone and secluded? These things can be subjective.
They were actually defined very precisely. Alone with a nun meant exactly that. Only the monk and the nun present, no one else.
Okay, and secluded place.
This wasn't just like a private room. It was defined as being secluded from sight, meaning you couldn't even see subtle things like eye movements or head nods, and secluded from sound, meaning normal conversation couldn't be overheard. Total privacy.
Wow, that's a very specific definition of seclusion.
It is. And the offense applied if the monk sat down while the nun was already sitting or lying there, or if the nun sat or lay down while he was sitting, or if they both sat or lay down together in that secluded spot.
Were there any exceptions? Like, what if someone else was nearby?
Yes, crucial exceptions. The presence of an intelligent second person, the Pali, is vinudutiyo. Essentially, a suitable chaperone who understands the situation negated the seclusion. If that third person was there, it wasn't considered alone.
Any other exceptions?
Also, if the monk was standing, not sitting, or if he was sitting there but for some completely unrelated purpose, like waiting for something else, or if he genuinely didn't realize the place was secluded, according to those strict definitions, then it wasn't an offense.
So the takeaway from this last rule,
it just hammers home the critical importance of clear, unambiguous boundaries and maintaining decorum in all interactions between monks and nuns. especially prevent situations that could even look like they might lead to sexual misconduct, let alone actual misconduct. It's about removing all doubt, protecting both individuals and the Sangha's reputation, even when there was a past lay relationship.
Wow. We've really covered a lot of ground there. We've navigated this truly fascinating set of Pācittiya rules.
We have, and what's striking is seeing how they weren't just abstract commands. They were direct responses to specific, often very human incidents.
Right. They were designed to protect the Sangha's reputation, absolutely, but also to ensure safety and somehow maintain this delicate balance between, rigorous discipline on one hand and real compassion and practicality on the other.
Exactly. That balancing act seems key.
For me, what really stands out from this whole deep dive is that recurring theme of public perception, that phrase.
Manusa ujanti.
Yes, people criticized. It seems like that was a major driving force behind so many of these rules. The early Sangha was deeply aware of how their actions looked to the lay community.
Absolutely. Their survival and support depended on that reputation for integrity. You couldn't just dismiss what people thought.
And the other thing that really struck me was that iterative process you mentioned, how a rule would be set.
Often quite strictly at first in response to a problem.
Right. And then, almost inevitably, a real-world situation would crop up, someone facing hardship or real danger because of that strictness.
And the rule would be softened or clarified with a compassionate exception. It shows it wasn't a fixed, unchanging legal code dropped from on high. It was dynamic, it evolved based on lived experience, always trying to find that workable balance.
It makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
These ancient rules born from very specific incidents thousands of years ago in a culture so different from ours. Yet they offer this really striking lens for looking at challenges that are, in some ways, timeless. Challenges of building any community, managing human interaction, the constant need to balance our ideals with, well, practical realities.
That's a great way to put it. So maybe the provocative thought to leave you, our listener, with is this. What might these ancient insights, this process of rulemaking, adaptation, balancing ideals with reality, suggest about how any community or any institution, or even just our own personal ethics, adapt and evolve today in response to our own lived experiences?
Something definitely worth mulling over.